You're up, Commissioner.
Okay, we're back in session and the Board of Equalization. The Deputy Clerk will swear in everyone that is going to participate in a hearing at this time. Yep. If you're going to participate, you need to.
Do you solemnly swear that any testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. This is video, just to let you know. This is a hearing on Board of Equalization under Idaho Law 63-501. The Board of County Commissioners is required to convene as the BOE. We are here to determine market value under Idaho Code 63-205. All real, personal, and operating property subject to property taxation must be assessed annually at market value for assessment purposes as of 12:01 a.m. of the first day of January in the year in which such property taxes are levied. Furthermore, where's my attorney? Furthermore, under Idaho Code 63-502, the function of the Board of Equalization shall be confined strictly to assuring that the market value for assessment purposes of property has been found by the assessor and to the functions provided for in Chapter 6, Title 63 of Idaho Code relating to exemptions from taxation. It is hereby made the duty of the Board of Equalization to enforce and compel a proper classification and assessment of all property required under the provisions of this title to be entered on the property rolls, and in so doing, the Board of Equalization shall examine the rolls and shall raise or cause to be raised or lower or cause to be lowered the assessment of any property which in the judgment of the Board has not been properly assessed. The taxpayer shall have the burden of proof in seeking affirmative relief to establish that the determination of the assessor is erroneous, including any determination of assessed value. A preponderance of evidence shall suffice to sustain the burden of proof. We're here to discuss the market value of the property, the condition, state, or information that is relevant to this topic. This is fact, not conjecture or things you may think. We're not here to discuss taxes, past grievances, policy, personal income, or other issues. If you do not stick to the discussion as requested, your time will be reclaimed. Rules are be kind, direct all questions or comments to the board. If your conduct gets out of line, you'll be warned, and if it continues to be out of line, you will be asked to leave or escorted from the premises.
Mr. Chairman, can we contact the county attorney?
Yes. Go ahead and put us, go ahead, call him.
Wait,
Oh,
there he
there he is.
A phone call that couldn't get off.
All right. And the way we're going to do this today is I'm going to go ahead and have you do your discussion.
Okay.
And then we'll eventually look at each property and see what happens there and what goes on. And then I'm going to ask for counsel from our legal and see where we're at. It doesn't mean we're going to make a decision right now, but that's the process we're going to use at this time. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate the time you've allotted for us. I understand it's an hour. I don't think we're going to need that full amount of time. I estimate probably 30, 35 minutes, but
Okay.
hopefully it won't be any longer than that.
Introduction.
I'll start by introducing myself.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Introduce yourself for the record.
My name is James Ruckty. I'm with Ruckty and Beck Law Offices, and I'm serving in a role as outside counsel for Portneuf Health Trust. Mr. Bitton is here with me. He's the Chief Financial Officer for Portneuf Health Trust, an employee of Portneuf Health Trust. In the room with us is Howard Burnett as well. Rick Smith, you may sometimes see him, but both of those attorneys are from Hawley Troxel. They also serve as outside counsel for special projects, including tax issues and litigation. Mr. Chairman, as I got ready for this presentation, what I really needed to do was kind of go back and remind myself what the history of the sale of the Bannock County Hospital was, just because I hadn't really thought about it for some time. The sale, as I think we're all aware, took place back in 2008. I was in the legislature at the time, but because this was a county issue, I wasn't, totally keyed in on all the finer details. But it was a very traumatic issue for the county, as I recall. People were very concerned about losing the county hospital. They understood that the sale of the hospital needed to be done, but who that sale took place to was a subject of a lot of debate. And especially when we were talking about selling Bannock County Hospital to a for-profit entity, because there were horror stories throughout the United States about counties selling their county hospitals to a for-profit, and the for-profit coming in and gutting the hospital, and so people were really nervous about it. I went back and I reviewed a letter of intent, which was much easier to read than the full contract that ultimately was signed. But the letter of intent was written by Zach Paris, who I believe served in Mr. Trammell's position back then. And it just laid out all of the details of the sale, or the anticipated sale. The community, what was evident was the community wanted to make sure it got value out of the sale of this very important institution. And as I said, the community it was really an emotional issue for the community. I mean, that Bannock County Hospital is where many of us were born, where many of us saw relatives pass from this life, and so they didn't take the sale lightly. There were provisions in the sale that dealt with cash payments. You would expect that. But perhaps as important to the community as those cash payments was the fact that the for-profit hospital was going to have to operate under a joint venture with a nonprofit charitable organization that had Bannock County's interests at heart. So they recognized the for-profit was going to be involved, but they wanted to make sure that a nonprofit charitable organization with Bannock County's best interests at heart, was involved in the operation moving forward. This community wanted Portneuf Health Trust to play that role as the nonprofit. Now back then, in 2008, it was Portneuf Health Care Foundation, that was the name of it, but we know that it changed the name. So they wanted the Portneuf Health Trust to work with the for-profit hospital to carry on the important work of the hospital. The agreement was that net profits of the joint venture were going to be split 77% to 23% for the nonprofit. The board members of the joint venture were going to be split 50-50, 50% representing the for-profit, 50% representing Portneuf Health Trust. And that's still the way that joint venture works. So this sale and that arrangement I just described was approved overwhelmingly by the citizens of Bannock County, by vote. The citizens of this community agreed with that operation and that model. So as the commissioners get ready to consider these property tax exemptions, I think it's important to consider why the citizens of Bannock County wanted Portneuf Health Trust to play this role. They trusted Portneuf Health Trust and its mission, and believed that moving forward, from 2008 moving forward, they'd stay true to that mission and take care of the community. So, Portneuf Health Trust, what is it? Why did the citizens of this community trust it? Well, it's a nonprofit organization under 501c3 of the IRS code. And that code section, I'm just going to read a little bit of it. It says to be tax exempt as a nonprofit under 501c3. An organization must be organized and operate exclusively for exempt purposes set forth in section 501c3. None of its earnings may inure or go to any private shareholder or individual. And when you look at what exempt purposes are, the code reads in part, the exempt purposes set forth in section 501c3 are charitable, and it goes on to list some others, religious, educational, scientific, but charitable is one of them. The term charitable is used in its generally accepted legal sense and includes relief of the poor, the distressed, or the underprivileged. So Portneuf Health Trust is set up under the Internal Revenue IRS code. and qualifies under that code. The Articles of Incorporation for Portneuf Health Trust show as well that it is a charitable organization. The Articles of Incorporation state that the purpose for which the corporation is organized and will be operated are as follows: to promote improved health status of the residents of Bannock County, Idaho, and the surrounding areas, to receive and maintain a fund or funds of real or personal property, or both, and subject to the restrictions, it goes on, to use and apply the whole or part of the facility, property, or the income for medical, scientific, charitable, or educational purposes. So that was part of their charter. And then I just wanted to read their mission statement, which is derived really from the Articles of Incorporation. The mission statement for Portneuf Health Trust is to enhance and improve the health of southeastern Idaho and surrounding areas. And the vision statement, the trust will be a successful, initiative-driven leader in improving health in our community, and will be recognized as a model for other health foundations throughout the country. That's their mission. And I only bring all that up because I think as the commissioners consider these property tax exemption requests, that it consider whether Portneuf Health Trust has stayed true to their mission. And by the way, in those Articles of Incorporation, I think it's important to note that the commissioners played a role, the county commissioners, Bannock County commissioners back then, and this was way back in 2002 when this organization was set up. They played a role in putting this corporation together, this nonprofit. And in fact, they still have a vested interest, because on page 2 of the Articles of Incorporation, it talks about dissolution. What happens if Portneuf Health Trust goes away at some point? Well, the corporation may not be dissolved without the prior express approval of the Board of Commissioners of Bannock County. So the commission, or the county, through the Board of County Commissioners, has a vested interest in the health of this organization, and if it ever is supposed to go away, county commissioners have to approve that. So, what has Portneuf Health Trust done for Bannock County to show that the trust that the voters vested in it was warranted, that it was a good investment? Commissioners may be familiar with this issue of this magazine right here. It was done because I think a lot of people were interested in what Portneuf Health Trust was. There was some confusion out there, but they wanted to know more about it. And this magazine does a really good job of explaining the purpose of the trust, explaining what it's done for the community. And so I brought a copy of this just so the commissioners, if you're interested, can take a look at it. We've got several copies here. But let me just talk about what the...
We'll need one of them for the record.
Okay.
Because that's part of the conversation.
So let me just run through briefly, like in summary fashion, some of the things that Portneuf Health Trust has done for the community over the last 6 or 7 years. And that's just over the last 6 or 7 years. They've invested well over $60 million into health projects in our community, and nearly half of that's just been gifts and contributions to other projects and organizations that are in this community. Our real estate holdings are investments in our mission of improving health. If Portneuf Health Trust was simply interested in returns and income, they would have just invested their money in other ways. Many of the projects that they invest their money in are not, for lack of a better term, money makers. If they were just interested in making money off of their money, they could find a way to do that, but that's not consistent with their mission. And we feel very strongly that our mission matters. We invested in a larger facility designed for the free clinic, and we think that was important, and that it mattered to those who are vulnerable in our community. That's consistent with our mission, and it's consistent with our tax status under 501c3. When no one else stood up to help, we think building the crisis center was important, that it mattered. In addition to building the crisis center, we think building out the D6 treatment facility, helping the courts diversionary therapy for those struggling with addiction and mental health matters, both to the people impacted, but also to our community as a whole. And you can ask officers at the jail, you can ask patrol officers in our community if these investments matter, and I think they will resoundingly say they do. We think investing in building a new and expanded VA clinic matters to our veterans and their families, and we've done that. And it's, again, consistent with our mission and with the IRS tax code. And then there's the the Center for Hope South. We think that investment mattered. We think all of these things create a healthier community and an important inventory for the community of services they can access. There's free health classes, free community wellness programs. We also think the 2023 contributions will matter to Idaho State. The PHT building we invested in will be a big asset to the community. And I tend to skip this one. It's probably the best known, but the amphitheater and the wellness center, it's the one that I think is used most by our community. I always worry that it overshadows all the other things that Portneuf Health Trust does for this community that are just well known, or less known. But this, of course, the wellness center and the amphitheater are well used by our community. They encourage healthy activities for families and individuals. And you can see that on any given weekend when you head up there. Frankly, on any given weekday, people use that facility, and it's important to the community. Just a bit about Portneuf Health Trust's revenues. They really come from three different sources. So the first one would be the joint venture. So when net revenues come from the operation of the Portneuf Hospital, those revenues go to the owners of the joint venture, and they're split 77-23%. So that's one set of revenues. Portneuf Health Trust has some an investment portfolio, investments they make. They are able to make money with that. And then, of course, the real estate holdings, which is what we're going to be talking about here today. All of these revenues are used to fulfill its mission, which, again, is to enhance and improve the health of southeastern Idaho and surrounding areas. None of the money goes to individuals or shareholders, none of it. It all goes to fulfilling the mission. Mr. Bitton will talk more about specific projects with which Portneuf Health Trust is claiming property tax exemptions for. But let me just generally talk about these projects, and I'll just make up a couple of examples so that you get a pretty clear idea of how it could be done and why Portneuf Health Trust really doesn't make money doing it. Let's say, and of course this one is true, we have a dearth of psychiatrists in the community to serve our community members. Or let's say that the specialty courts here in Bannock County needed more counselors for people participating in those courts, whether it's the drug court or the veterans court, whatever it is. But we were having a tough time recruiting psychiatrists, or in the other example, counselors to come here. But let's say up in Idaho Falls they had practices that might consider coming here, but to justify it to them, the headache of expanding, doing all the things that go along with expanding a practice that's already functioning well in another community, they say, well, I don't know, we don't think we want to do this just because overhead is too high and it's just not tempting enough, and so we're not going to do it. Portneuf Health Trust could purchase a piece of property in furtherance of that mission to entice that practice group to come down and serve the community. Now, they might say, yeah, but we can't just have any building, we've got to have build-outs, and it's got to, certain offices, and it's got to be done a particular way. Portneuf Health Trust, and has done this in the past, they've also done the build-outs. Essentially made the tenant improvements so the tenant doesn't have to pay for them. And then it comes up with a price, a rental price, which can be below market price. And Mr. Bitton will talk more about this, but in most of these situations, they aren't going to get back their tenant improvements, the amount of money they put into tenant improvements, even if they are charging a market rate. Or if they do get back the money for tenant improvements, it's going to take 100 years. I mean, they really are making a sacrifice to make sure we accomplish the mission first, and then revenues are second, sometimes a distant second. Portneuf Health Trust, and the reason we're here, like many other operations, needs predictability and reliability in its future operations. In that way, it's like most other businesses, and that includes its taxes. Portneuf Health Trust has been receiving property tax exemptions similar to the ones it's here requesting since about 2009, when the joint venture first came about. In fact, and I think this is important to note, it first applied for property tax exemptions because it was encouraged to do so by the county commissioners at the time. They had just finished this process of selling the Bannock County Hospital to a for-profit but run by a joint venture, and they felt it was appropriate to grant those property tax exemptions. And then finally, before I turn it over to Mr. Bitton, the statute, of course, which is very important as the commission considers these requests, talks about how, under 63-602C, a property qualifies for an exemption. And those first few lines, I think, are important. The following property is exempt from taxation: property belonging to any fraternal, benevolent, or charitable limited liability company or corporation used exclusively for the purposes for which such limited liability company, corporation, or society is organized. And so that's why we're here, is to request an exemption under that code section for that reason.
Thank you. So, Mr. Ruckley has referred to the Portneuf Health Trust, our community pamphlet. It was published by the Idaho State Journal, and so Idaho State Journal went out and interviewed people and said, okay, what does the Portneuf Health Trust do? And so this first article is from Kendra Evanson. I think she's works for the Idaho State Journal. And so the first one I'd like to talk about is, I'm sure that you've heard these companies out there, but maybe you don't know what they do. So the Pocatello Free Clinic is the first one that she interviewed. And it says, the Pocatello Free Clinic has been caring for Southeast Idaho medically underdeserved for half a century. Executive Director Sherry Joseph, RN, says the Free Clinic, which celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2021, is one of the oldest in the country. We believe that everyone deserves the right to medical, dental, and mental health care, Joseph said. Sometimes people are unable to access this care, and that is where we step in. For some, it's temporary. For others, it's ongoing. But either way, it's important. We also believe that by raising the health of one person, we raise the health of our entire community. Portneuf Health Trust made it possible for the clinic to move out of its previous location, a 100-year-old former fire station, it leased from the city of Pocatello for $1 a year, and into an approximately 3,500 square foot building located at City Center Campus, 101 North 7th Avenue, Pocatello. Thanks to the generosity of Portneuf Health Trust, who completely renovated the City Center Campus for us free of charge. And so we did. we went in and we took a portion of our building. It's about 50,000 square foot building. We took about 3,500 square feet of that. We went in, tore out walls, rebuilt, repainted, carpeted. We paid over $250,000 for the space for the Pocatello Free Clinic. Yes, we charge them rent. We receive income. The rent covers the operating costs, the lights, the heat, the water, and the repairs. We're never going to recover the $250,000 investment. We don't charge enough rent to do that. One, they wouldn't be able to pay for it. But we believe that the people that are going to the free clinic matter, and it's part of our mission statement. It's also, there's an ongoing investment through Portneuf Medical Center and the Health Trust, where it's over $100,000 a year that's being donated in cash contributions over and above the discounted rental rate that we do. That helps pay for providers and the ongoing operations that they have for their nurses and doctors and whatnot for the clinic. The other one that I wanted to just mention was the Crisis Center. We've all heard about the Crisis Center, but a lot of people don't know what the Crisis Center does. And before 2019, the option for help was slim for individuals struggling with drug issues and mental health emergencies. Struggling individuals could either be housed at the Portneuf Medical Center's emergency room or at the Bannock County jails, neither of which is set up to specifically help for the unique needs of those wrestling with addiction. All of this changed in April of 2019 when Southeastern Idaho Behavioral Health Center became a new option that provides resources and treatments within its walls to clients and develops a recovery plan when they leave. The Crisis Center differs from the county jail and the emergency room. It also addresses more of the patient's overall needs, such as providing health assessments, mental health services, case manager, bed, and food. The 24-hour Crisis Center located at Portneuf Health Trust City Center campus at the address has helped nearly 1,500 clients throughout 7 counties since it opened. The community doesn't understand what a huge asset Portneuf Health Trust is for the behavioral health in this community, said DeVere Hunt, owner of Best LLC, the contract holder with Bannock County for managing the Southeastern Idaho Behavioral Crisis Center. We don't have an organization like this in Idaho Falls, and we wish we did. So just another example of what Portneuf Health Trust does. We're kind of behind the scenes where we go in and we help organizations help other people. And we do that through our real estate investments. Again, we've invested about $350,000 to go in and build the Crisis Center in part of our City Center campus. Yes, we charge rent. We charge enough to cover the lights, the heat, the water, the repairs. We're never going to be able to recover the real estate investment because we don't charge enough. But we believe that the people that attend that matter, and it's part of our mission statement to improve and enhance the health of Bannock County and the surrounding areas. The last example that I wanted to talk about is the D6 treatment. In addition to building the Crisis Center, we think that building out the D6 treatment facility, helping the court's diversionary therapy for those struggling with addiction and mental health mattered, both to the people impacted and ask the officers at the jail and patrolling our community if these investments matter. So again, from an article that the Idaho State Journal put together on what is the D6, D6 Treatment is an addiction treatment center, is one of the several organizations benefiting from the health ecosystem that exists at Portneuf Health Trust City Center campus. D6 Treatment helps those struggling with addiction who are on probation and have been accepted into one of the 6 district judicial programs solving courts. It has between 175 and 200 active clients at any given time. The City Center campus allowed D6 to be located with the Crisis Center and the free clinic to create a behavioral health focused one-stop for our shared clients, said Carrie Hong, the trial court administrator for Idaho 6th District Judicial Courts. The campus, centrally located in Port of Health Trust, has been an active partner in designing a space for D6 treatments to serve clients. Port of Health Trust spent approximately $250,000 in creating a space for D6 treatment at its City Center campus. It continues to contribute cash and support annually. And the Bannock County Commissioners understood the need to help craft an initial vision of the 6th District Court in Idaho, and specifically Carrie Hong created the broader version of the operational concept. Port of Health Trust and D6 treatment have shared missions in improving the health of our community, Hong said. So again, we paid approximately $350,000 to build out the D6 treatment. Again, we charge rent, it covers the operating costs for the lights, the heat, the water, repairs. Again, we'll never charge enough to be able to recoup that cost, the initial investment. But again, it goes back to our mission statement. We feel that these people matter and that it's important for our community. That's just 3 of the ones that they identified that I went through. We've already talked about the wellness complex. We've talked about, well, the Health Trust collaborates with Health West, Inc., so we provide financial support to Health West. The Veterans Clinic, which is located in our medical office building over 500 South 11th Avenue. The United Way, City Center campus, we've talked about. The free clinic, we talked about the D6. We encourage community fitness. We have the medical plaza over at Northgate, which is just newly built. Portland Medical Center is a community partner and leader. The Portland Health Trust invests in the Greenway Trail system, and we have a police substation over at our medical office that's give to the city or the county. So just a few things. And this was in 2021. We've got ongoing things, which I think he was going to talk about.
Well, actually, I mean, I think we've kind of outlined the argument. I think, well, the trust is a charitable organization. It makes investments directly in this community. They're all related to its legal purpose of promoting quality medical care. And then it takes that money and it plows it back into charitable activities. And it's received these exemptions for most of the last 14 years or so. It complies with Idaho Code 63-602C that the property is to be used exclusively for the purposes for which the entity was formed. And from the beginning, all of the property has been used for that purpose, the mission of Portland Health Trust. Anything else we'd like to share?
No, I got more examples, but I mean, ongoing examples. The City Center, Rec Center, that we're doing $1.3 million renovation. That's
Yeah, maybe tell them about the rec center, and then we'll ask just any questions you have. We're happy to answer.
Yeah, so we got ongoing projects. The newest one is the Pocatello City Rec Center over there. We're going in and doing a renovation, expansion of that project. We've committed about $1.3 million to that renovation project. And so we're hoping this fall that the construction will start on there to help the community. And again, we're not getting anything back from that. I mean, that's just part of our mission. That's why the Health Trust was organized, was to help the people of Bannock County surrounding areas and to help their mission. So hopefully by beautifying that, expanding it, we'll get more people to be able to use that rec center and improve their health. So.
Brian? Comments?
Any specific questions that the commission has for me? Or, sorry, the board?
Just the same interpretation. I mean, I ask you to go ahead and look over the same that Mr. Rudke's told us, the statute, and any comments about that?
I believe that the bulk of it's you're asking for the exemption under 63-602C, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the first two things is to consider: one, Is it a charitable organization? And number two, is the property being used exclusively for that purpose? Of no, I don't know if you've had the chance to read the Idaho Youth Ranch case from the Supreme Court in 2014, which states that if a property is leased in its entirety, it's treated differently for exemption purposes compared to a partial lease or ownership. So basically, the Idaho Youth Ranch case from the Supreme Court says if an otherwise exempt property is leased in its entirety, the exemption doesn't apply. I don't know if you want to discuss that.
Well, maybe just briefly, Mr. Trammell, the Youth Ranch case, I mean, number one, I'd like to see the application of the same principles in other cases just to see really where the Supreme Court is going with that. But I suppose it depends on how the properties are viewed in this case. For example, we consider them to be a portfolio of parcels as opposed to just individual parcels. It's a portfolio of parcels that the Health Trust has purchased to accomplish its mission. So even though you know, under the analysis of the Idaho Youth Ranch case, you might be able to apply it to a particular parcel to come out with an outcome similar to Idaho Youth Ranch, our situation is much different because we own multiple properties and we use all of those properties to accomplish our mission. For the PMs, well, let's see. For instance, with the 3 Northgate parcels, only 1 is now leased to the hospital. The Youth Ranch case says that if property is either leased entirely or is used for a business purpose not directly related to the charitable purpose, it's not exempt. But for the PMC property, we don't have to worry about that lease issue since record title is held by the hospital and it's used directly by the hospital. It's the second part of the exclusion that's relevant, and it has 2 parts: that it's used for a business purpose and that it is not directly related to the purposes for which the charitable organization was formed. Even if business means generating revenue or leasing to a for-profit entity, that's still directly related to our core purpose.
Questions?
Doesn't, in the statute that we're talking about, doesn't it also talk about having to be a nonprofit? So a for-profit entity would be treated differently than a nonprofit entity.
There's different things that the board can consider. It's not exclusive, but to look if it's a charitable entity. I mean, definitely they can look at the articles of incorporation, I think, that and the purpose and everything of that nature, but also what on a specific property, like are there donations that are being made, right? Are they charging the public? Is, other things to consider, saying, is this being used for a charitable purpose and is it being used for its organization? So you can look at the organization. 501c3, I believe they said you're registered with the IRS on that, right?
Yes.
On that. I mean, that's for the determination for the BOE to make, saying is this charitable, and then based on their purpose, how they're organized, things of that nature, and then what's the purpose that, or how is it being used? Is it exclusive for the purpose that it was organized? And then other considerations could be, are they making a profit of it? How are they funded? Is it through private donations? Is it what's the benefit to the public? Are the people that are receiving the benefit, or are they having to pay for it or not? Things of that nature. It's appropriate for the BOE to consider.
So some of these, there's a bunch of parcels listed here. Some of these, it's listed as being under Portneuf Health Trust. Some of them are listed under Portneuf Medical Center. Portneuf Medical Center, that's for profit, isn't it?
Yes, but we have a Schedule A and a Schedule B. The Schedule A is owned 100%, those parcels, by Portneuf Health Trust. The Schedule B is we're requesting the 23% exemption, as in the past, for the ownership of the Portneuf Medical Centers.
Because PMC itself is for profit.
PMC is 77% of it for profit, 23% is Portneuf Health Trust ownership. And then, just a side note, all the places that we rent to are to fulfill the purpose, like Portland Medical Center. I mean, they're doing medical stuff up there, everything from knee replacements to new babies to whatever. It's to improve the health of Bannock County and surrounding areas. So we feel like renting to somebody that's fulfilling our mission is this, rather than us going out and building a hospital and doing it, we're partnering with an organization that's already providing that service.
And I'll just tell you right there that I feel like that's double dipping in some areas, because we're charging the taxpayers, and they're gonna be taxed. And you talked about the free clinic, and you talked about the crisis center on D6. We already give them funds to each one of them organizations, so the taxpayers are paying twice. So it's something that I have to level out in my own mind. Why should the taxpayers be paying twice in some of these situations?
I don't know if this will help, Mr. Chairman, but going back to 2008, when we had a county hospital, all of that property was tax exempt. And when the voters approved the transition, the contract that transitioned Bannock County Hospital and sold it to the for-profit and Portland Health Trust to operate under that umbrella, they recognized that they would get a benefit from that, because 77% of the revenue made would be taxed, or 77% of the property would be taxed. So I think the voters, when they made that decision, understood that the nonprofit would still get tax exempt status.
I mean, we can't go back there and evaluate, but I can just tell you that most people that I've talked to today, they don't even understand what's happening. They don't, I mean, they go up to the wellness complex up here, and they think it's Portland Health Trust Wellness Complex. Well, in a way it is, but in a way it isn't, because Bannock County's paying all the funds, and tax dollars are going in to keep that facility running. And then as we're talking about that end of it, it's tough for me to understand how come that board gets box seats personal for themselves. That doesn't seem like that fits into this process, because they are gaining something out of that facility where everybody else is paying to go to a concert and everything else. So there's just some things in here. And the other part of it is the hospital purchased the rights from the county hospital. And then those funds were dictated by this board of what went on with them. I mean, they didn't really come back to the taxpayers, in my opinion. So, and then the other part about this is the way that board's set up. They say that they're benefiting the county, but nobody from the county is on that board to have a voice in.
Do you mean none of the county commissioners, or you mean nobody in the county?
An elected official is not involved with that at all. So how are we getting the voice of the county out there? Because no elected officials are involved in any of this decision-making. So just the things that are in the back of my mind as we talk about all these things.
Yeah.
So.
I think I appreciate the concerns. Even though there aren't elected officials on the board, it still is comprised with members of our community who have the best interests of the community, have background to make them good board members. In those positions, I assume they serve without pay.
Yes.
Some boards, of course, pay their board members. Some pay them quite nicely. Some organizations do, but I suspect that the seats you refer to are just kind of a benefit to do something nice for them.
It's like I sit on the health board, okay? And we have people that are not elected officials because by law, a commissioner can appoint somebody. But they don't have a part in the game, in my opinion, because they're not elected. The people can't come in and say on this board, we want somebody that's elected, somebody that we can bring out of that office. Because if this board is appointed, the people themselves have no say in it at all. They have no voice about what happens with all these funds.
Well, that might be the case, Mr. Chairman, in that an elected official, there's no voice through an elected official to the board. But what I would say in response is that when this transaction was put together in 2008, when the voters agreed to it, it was understood that that was going to be the case. And even the county commissioners understood at the time, who represented the county, that they wouldn't have that sort of indirect or direct voice, I guess direct voice. But it was part of the deal that was made and part of the deal that we're trying to live with.
Well, and we can go into that part of it later, because there's a lot of things in that contract that I disagree with 100%. But just to stay here, of what the function of the board and staying within their mission statement and stuff, some of the areas I wonder.
Okay.
I honestly wonder if they are. And part of that is because the good of the community is set by a few people and not people that are elected on a constant basis that are answering to the people. This board doesn't answer to the people, is what I'm saying.
Mr. Chair, if I might add one thing. So going back, I believe the question was, how do we know if they're a charitable, company or a charitable purpose? And Mr. Rector, you can let me know if you disagree. I'm just going off some case law I saw here for the board to consider. It says that to consider an organization's charitable status for purposes of the property tax exemption, you can, this isn't exclusive, but the stated purpose of its undertaking, whether its functions are charitable, whether it's supported by donations, whether the recipients of the service are required to pay for the assistance they receive, whether there is a general public benefit, whether the income received produces a profit, to whom the assets would go upon dissolution of the corporation, and whether the charity provided is based on need. It also says it's essential that they provide some sort of general public benefit. But in the legal sense, to be charitable, it just doesn't have to satisfy a need for the public. It could be religious, it could be recreational, educational, amongst other ways. But I just want the board to know that those are factors that the board can consider in deciding, is this, one, a charitable organization, and then number two, is it being used for a charitable use?
And I agree with that, Mr. Trammell. I think that's a good statement of the law, and it has sideboards on it, but it's also written pretty broadly. You don't have to fulfill every one of those requirements, but they do give the commission a good list from which they can consider whether it's a charitable organization. But I would encourage the commission to just take a look at generally what Port of Health Trust does and has done for the community. And I think you'd be hard pressed not to consider this a charitable organization. Provides access to health care for the indigent. It encourages healthy activities for our community. It promotes the health of southeastern Idaho and surrounding areas.
One of the issues that I struggle with, and maybe we can get some clarification today, the property, for example, is the ortho clinic there on Center Street. Okay, that, to me, that is a for-profit organization that is run, that you guys are looking for that 23% exemption. I think you're 23% owners in that one. Am I missing?
So we own 100% of the,
Let's define we. Who's we?
Port of Health Trust,
Okay.
its subsidiaries, which are solely owns 100% of the building, the ortho clinic. We do lease that, the operations of it, to Portland Medical Center that provides medical services to the people.
Okay, so on the lease that you're charging them, are you charging them a market rate lease, or are you charging them less than a market rate lease?
Market rate lease.
Okay. And then the other property.
Same thing with the Northgate, we charge market rate.
Okay. The other property that I had a little bit of a question on was the house there on 11th for your,
Okay.
your visitors. Talk about that a little bit, would you?
So that piece of property is located right next to the medical office building, 500 South 11th Avenue. It's just across the street. It is a house that is used, I call it the Ronald McDonald House, because I don't know what to call it, but it's when people come in, families, and they have a cancer patient or whatnot, they can stay there in that house free of rent. We pay all the utilities and everything for that, but we don't charge the people for it. So it's, that's what that house is used for. The health trust or the joint venture owns that, so we're only requesting the 23% tax exemption on that one.
Okay.
There's also a piece of property, it's about 20 acres, that has an RV park on it, where it's kind of the same thing. Family members can park their RV, they have water, electricity, sewer hookups. If they have an extended stay or whatnot, we don't charge anything for that. It's just to try it, I don't know what you'd call that. It's not the Ronald McDonald House, but it's kind of the same concept.
Okay.
Can you
And we're
tell me,
requesting 23% of that, not the full.
Right.
can you tell me how many board members there are on the Board of Health Trust?
7.
7. And I thought it was supposed to be 50% from the hospital and 50% from the community.
So the-
That's what I understood you to say earlier.
So the Portneuf Health Trust Board is a seven member, and then we have the joint venture, which we have 50% say in with the owner, the Ardent Healthcare.
Oh, I
So
see.
That's
So-
where we get the 50%. So we have a 50% voting right in saying, okay, we are going to replace the CEO or the CFO, but we don't deal with the day-to-day operations as far as who we're contracting with, or we don't ever see any of that stuff.
So
We only-
50% of the board is with Ardent.
They have a, yes, the owner of the for-profit. So, and they have the day-to-day operations. We don't deal with those at all.
So we have about 30 properties in here. We're getting short on time. My request would be that, and maybe you have,
I got them all right here.
okay, but who owns them? And
This tells you who owns. So this is owned by 23%. So these are really owned by the medical center. And these up here are owned by the health trust.
and is that, was that in your packet today?
Yeah.
It wasn't in mine.
It's
It's in the packet.
Okay, it must be in the electronic version, because I don't have it here that I could see. But that's what I was wanting, is to know exactly who the owner was, what the purpose is, and the function that happens within that property.
So Mr. Bitton will maybe comment in a little more detail, but I think it's important, just high level. Portneuf Health Trust, these properties all belong to Portneuf Health Trust. There are subsidiary LLCs that have been created probably for liability protection purposes, et cetera. But all of the properties belong to Portneuf Health Trust through these subsidiaries.
Even the B properties on your
Even the B
schedule?
properties.
The B properties,
So you list the ones that are 23%, which includes, for example, parking lot, patient guest house, imaging center. Several are listed as other. And according to this chart, if I'm understanding the chart right, those are 23% owned by the health trust, which means that they're really owned by the medical
That
center,
happens within those properties.
77%.
yes, their own, so group name, Portneuf Medical Center, is the owner, and so the group B, we're asking for the 23% ownership.
Right, but as far as ownership, those are owned by the medical center, all the Group B? Because that's the way I understood this chart. Is that not true?
They are owned by the subsidiaries, Portneuf Portneuf, what is the official?
Portneuf Hospital.
Portneuf Hospital LLC.
Portneuf Hospital LLC.
I'm sorry, Commissioners, let me just add a sentence.
You haven't been sworn in?
Well, I have not been sworn.
So,
Okay.
thank you.
Happy to be, if that would be of assistance.
Mr. Chair, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So, Mr. Rector, you did bring up that there were properties that were being leased. Is that for rental income, or do you consider those to be donations?
Well, some of the properties are leased.
So they're leased for rental income?
There is rental income that is derived from the properties.
I just wanted to clarify that.
So you're talking about like the crisis center and the free clinic, we have a lease agreement, but it covers the amount of the operating costs, the heat, the water, the lights, et cetera.
Okay.
So even though there's income coming in, I just don't want that to be confused with income above and beyond liabilities. If we consider all the liabilities that went into preparing the property, for example, tenant improvements, things like that Portneuf Health Trust took on, yes, they are receiving revenue in the name of rent or a lease payment, but it certainly doesn't mean in most of these cases that rent payment was above and beyond liabilities that it cost to lease the property out. The other thing I was hoping that I'd like to mention is simply this: the statutory language refers to the term belongs to. So ownership can take on some special meaning, and I know it's easier just to use the word owns because it's just easier to use. But the real question under the statute is, who does the property belong to? And that distinction can be important.
Well, we've pretty much settled with everybody else, it's ownership. So, we have another one this afternoon, so. But I'd like a little more information. What I'd like on these properties is to know what the function is right now, what are they used for, and what are you gaining off of it?
Okay. Is that for the 23% or the 100%?
On all of them.
All of them,
All of
okay.
them. I'd just like that information back to us so that we have that little bit more to go on.
So I have, like for instance, that's the city center. That's
I think we better take the time to really line it out.
Okay.
When would you like that, Mr. Chairman? Make sure we get it to you.
Actually, we need them by Friday, probably. Monday's our last day for BOE.
And did you get the specific things they wanted?
You're just wanting to know what the property is used for specifically.
Yeah, what is the purpose of it right now, and how do you feel like that meets your goals or your mission
purpose,
statement? Because it's important to me that if it doesn't meet the mission statement at all, then it's out of the picture. I mean, that's the criteria.
For example, the bare land, how does that meet your mission statement?
Okay. We can get you that information by Friday. Close of business, is that?
Yeah.
Might be
yeah.
able to get it to you
Just so that we
sooner,
could
but
have a little time to review it on Monday and have a conversation.
Yeah.
And then, Mr. Chairman, we have, do you want copies
Yeah,
or
we
copy?
can take that, just so that we have
Just
at least 4 of them.
for the
So
record, is
one goes on the record and the commissioners can look at that.
it's the Portneuf Health Trust, Our Community Magazine. I believe it was produced by the Idaho State Journal, but I'll just.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for providing us the time. We appreciate it.
This is something that, I'll tell you, we have so many tax exempts that before it wasn't looked at. And I'm not condemning any previous offices or stuff, but I don't think they were looked at it very seriously. But every taxpayer throws into this one way or another. And that's what we're elected to do, is protect them taxpayers.
We appreciate it.
So, all right.
Thank you.
With that being said, we'll be at